So we will be starting things off here rather shortly. We do have our panelists ready to go here to answer your questions here just after we go through a bit of a introduction here. So it looks like we've got a few people joining us. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us today. We know there's been quite a few video chats of late, so we appreciate you setting aside the time to join us. We have an exciting conversation lined up here today, and we are looking forward to having your questions be put forward to our great panel that we have for you here today. So we're going to be getting underway here rather shortly, but yes, just be sure that you have a warm cup of coffee or water ready, and make sure to have a notebook or notepad set aside so that you can write down some questions. We'll also have the ability for you to enter them in the chat, but if there's any sort of notes that you want to take, we definitely encourage you to do so, because there's a lot of really great information that's going to be delivered here today. So again, thank you so much for setting time aside to join us today. And if you want to use the chat and just mention to us where you're joining us from, that would be fantastic, just to see where we have everyone joining us from these days. We are global now, so it's always great to see who's joining these events. Looks like we've got Mississauga, we've got Montreal, Nova Scotia, Vancouver, British Columbia, Toronto, Woodstock, Ontario. This is all great to see. Stratford, Ontario as well. So great representation from Ontario and from Quebec and from Nova Scotia. I'm joining you here from Regina in Saskatchewan. Got Montreal as well, and Nova Scotia again as well. That's great. Well, it looks like we've got quite a variety of locations here represented. So that's really great to see, and I'm sure as we continue here and as folks join us, we'll see a lot more. Without further ado, I think we're going to get started. My name is Brennan Schmidt, and I am co-author of Cyber City Safe, Emergency Planning Beyond the Maginot Line. And I am pleased to be joining you here today as a facilitator of today's conversation. Now, upwards of 60% of cyber attacks were financially motivated. That's a pretty large number, given the fact that when we are looking at news coverage, there's a lot about ransomware. And in fact, upwards of 80% of those attacks were related to ransomware. And it's a costly thing to business, and it affects businesses of all sizes. In fact, the average malicious attack in 2020 ended up costing upwards of $4 million. And when you factor in ransomware over top of that, you're seeing in the statistics here that there's an additional $200,000 on average, upwards of that. So it's very, very expensive business. And in fact, if we look at a more recent example here in Acer, we have cyber criminals looking for ransom in the field of $50 million. Now, these are significant numbers that is definitely going to impact the bottom line in more ways than one. And the thing to keep in mind is that organizations of all sizes can be impacted, and it's not a matter of if, but when. And this is what you're going to discover here today as we unpack this conversation with our great panel that we have joining us here today. Now, when we're talking about small and medium-sized businesses, SMB, over 40% of them are cyber attacks related to that type of business. And as mentioned, no organization is left immune to this. So today, you're going to get the opportunity here, like I said, from our panel of experts, and you're going to be able to ask them your questions that you have about this topic. Now, I just want to make a really quick mention of today's sponsor, Field Effect. Field Effect believes that businesses of all sizes deserve powerful cybersecurity solutions to protect them. And the company's threat detection, monitoring, training, and compliance products and services are the results of years of research and development by the brightest talents in cybersecurity. So we just want to say big thank you to today's sponsor, Field Effect, for making today possible. Now, in just a few moments, you're going to hear a highlight of around 20 minutes or so from a conversation that I had with Andrew Loshman, who is the Chief Operating Officer with Field Effect, as well as Alan Bonner, who is a crisis management specialist. Now, you're going to hear the highlight of that conversation that we had just a few days ago, like I mentioned. About halfway through, we're going to have a quick message from today's sponsor. And then immediately following that, we're going to turn things over to you. And you're going to have the opportunity to ask your questions as well via chat, as well as video. Now, without further ado, I would like to throw things over to our team to play that clip of our conversation from the other day. And as you're watching, be sure to take note of anything that stands out to you so that we can engage in that conversation. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us here today. Let's start things off. Andrew, what would your recommendations be to organizations that want to be resilient?
Absolutely. The primary recommendation is fairly simple, and that's to acknowledge as a business that you will need to make an investment in cybersecurity and in incident response. Now, that investment can be in time, it can be in money, and it can be in education and knowledge for your employees. I think that one of the things that often businesses feel is that it's hopeless and that you can't make an improvement in your cybersecurity or that you can't make a difference post incident, and that's not true. And the other fallacy is that cybersecurity and incident response has to be expensive. That's also not true. You can build effective cybersecurity measures that are scaled and scoped to the size of your organization, and if you prepare, it will make a major difference in reducing the time, the cost, financial and otherwise, in your business.
Well, agreed, and a lot of people think that threat analysis and quantitative risk assessment are very complex and sexy topics, and yet we're all in those businesses every day. Do we drink a third cup of coffee because of the health effects that we've heard about? Do we have a second glass of red wine? Are we going to make it through that orange light? Can we walk across the street before the red hand comes up on the walk signal? What they told me in the military when I was working on most Canadian Forces bases was every now and then, pencils down, hand off the keyboard, and think, where are we vulnerable? Do we have our lists? Do we have the right people, the capabilities? Can we think like the perpetrator? What would we do if we wanted to attack ourselves? And that's what small businesses should be doing. And Andrew, you're 100% correct. It's not necessarily expensive or even a cost, but it is a benefit.
Now, we know there's a lot going around with ransomware these days. It seems to be synonymous with cybersecurity. But from each of your perspectives, what would you say is an important component of education when we think about informing ourselves of ransomware? We'll turn things over to Alan first.
This is one of those things where it's almost impossible to over communicate. You could use screensavers, emails, newsletters on paper to remind everyone in the company to be cautious, to be safe, to change passwords, and all those things that Andrew probably knows more about than I do. But I'm also a big fan of a hot team. And that doesn't mean they dress well or look good. It means they are the hour one team. This team should have a higher level of education and awareness to be ready to respond to an event within the first hour, because after the first hour, you may have lost control of it. Those people need to be on a regular educational regime of making sure they're familiar with the law, the technology, what will happen, and the company needs to have people who can swoop in on a moment's notice and fill in for their regular job functions, so the hot team is only responding to the event.
And Andrew, your thoughts?
Certainly, education and cybersecurity can mean many different things. In the context of incident response and handling acute cybersecurity issues and incidents, I think awareness within the organization, but within the decision-making function in a company is critical. And that awareness is that really the time has passed where you hope you're not going to have an incident. Now in 2021, it's essential to be aware and be educated to the fact that an incident is almost inevitable. What is not inevitable is the scope of the incident. So you can have, of course, very large cybersecurity incidents and very publicly known incidents like the Equifax breach or many others that we've read about in the media. But there is also incidents where you've prepared and are in good technical as well as organizational space to limit and respond to the cybersecurity issue, in which case it might just be a relatively routine matter. And so at the end of the day, where we used to say 5-10 years ago that you needed to be aware of the specific threats that could affect you if you're a large bank, if you're a small business, if you're a government. Today, especially when it comes to ransomware, it's important to be educated and aware of the fact that if you have any money whatsoever and you use the internet, you do have a cybersecurity issue that you need to be conscious of and prepare for accordingly.
And just a quick follow-up question to that, Andrew. When we think about all the data that's collected here, security information and event management seems to come to mind post event when we're taking a look at that data. What kind of insights can you share on this front with viewers?
When it comes to incident response, you can divide it into organizational information that's required, decision making, and so on. But on the technical side of things, really what you need at the core of things is what we like to refer to as visibility. You require visibility into what is going on your network. Why is that? Because you need to understand what happened. You need to be able to understand, is it still happening? Once you figure out what the issue is, then of course you're going to attempt to stop it. And so then you need to have visibility. You think about this like a physical world with security cameras. You need to be able to see that your efforts to stop the incident or the cyber threat were in fact effective. Visibility in cybersecurity means access to data. And so there are many different categories of data on a network. You can have network data, so that's like recording the traffic as it's going in and out of your network. You can have endpoint device data, so that would be what processes are running on a computer, what software is installed on your mobile phones. And one thing that a lot of people often don't think about when they consider visibility or data in their network are their use of cloud systems. Microsoft 365, as well as Google Workspaces, are a primary part of a lot of networks these days. Most businesses, in fact, I would wager. And so having visibility into the going-ons in those parts of your network are critical as well.
Brendan, let me underscore what Andrew just said in two ways. One, we're always talking about the big bank, the big insurance company, the hospital, etc. And we're talking about state actors, terrorists, and ransomware. But there's another category that worries me a lot, and that is with small businesses. You may just have someone who wants to create mischief or who didn't enjoy his or her shopping experience at your small business. So you're vulnerable even if you don't have the lot of money that Andrew spoke of, or if you're a very small business. Secondly, in terms of the data that you want, the military have a thing called an unusual occurrence report. And what that means is anything that's unusual. So if you have access to all of your former customers, the purchasing profile of some of those customers may give you a clue. If you have all the emails you've ever sent and received in the past couple of years, a few phishing emails from a similar source or with similar terminology may be good. So what data do you want? All of it.
So Andrew, what kind of recommendations would you have for actually containing the breach or the event once it's happened?
The first thing that you want to do is to understand or scope the incident. So you can break this down into two parts. What is it that you know, and what are the potential things that could have happened or could still be happening? An example would be maybe you know that one computer has been compromised or one computer has had ransomware installed on it, yet there's the possibility that other computers may have ransomware on them or may be about to be ransomware. And so understanding and scoping the incident, the extent to which the breach is either known or believed to have occurred, is critical. Once you understand the scope, then you can undertake the immediate mitigation efforts. And really what you want to do is isolate the systems that you believe to be affected. Isolating a computer system or an IT system means removing it from the network. So that can be done in a variety of ways, some technical and some physical, like unplugging the cable from the network, obviously. And the reason you want to do that is typically an attacker, especially when we're talking about ransomware, once they understand that you know they're there, they're going to act quickly to try and do whatever they can to achieve their objective or amplify what it is they've already done. And so you want to be able to take away their ability to access your network or use the tools that they've already installed on your network. An example would be a remote desktop tool that they're using to control a compromised system. But you also have to think about the network edge. So firewalls, VPN devices, remote access, especially in the pandemic world where so many people are remote accessing into your network. This is how attackers will often focus their efforts and attempt to compromise the so-called perimeter devices. And so you need to think about what the scope of the issue is, what systems are affected, what systems could be affected, and then isolating those systems as quickly as possible to avoid the attacker being able to continue their activity.
And now we're just going to take a quick break to listen to a message from today's sponsor, Field Effect. We'll be right back. And we are back. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, on the public relations front, Alan, I'm sure you have a lot of insights to share based off of your previous experience. What kind of advice can you give to viewers here in terms of containing what will be a public relations crisis?
Well, you may not be able to contain and may not be able to control, but you may be able to have influence. So my rule is tell as few people, as little as possible, as late as possible. And that may be everything you know in the next 5 minutes. It may be 80% of what you know 2 weeks from now, or it may be 100% of what you know a year and a half from now. You really need to be making an ongoing decision about every 15 minutes about who to tell. If it's a publicly traded company, investor relations. If it's has a board of directors, a committee of the board, or the full board, or all senior managers, or all employees. So it's really a tough decision because you can end up alerting the world to the fact that you had this problem, or you can end up calming a few select stakeholders down. I also recommend blowing all of your budgets. Now is the time, when you've had a cybersecurity breach, to blow the next 2 years' budgets on industrial relations, government relations, public relations, media relations, and customer relations, depending on the type of company you are, because you need to protect your reputation. The cyber breach may have cost you X tens of thousands of dollars, but the hit to your reputation may be far greater than that.
Both of you have mentioned a lot of information here, but I'm sure a lot of people that are listening here are thinking, well, how do I go about assessing this? So with that in mind, we'll turn things over to Andrew. What are the steps involved in terms of assessing this kind of an event?
I think that this goes immediately to the preparation side of things. And so when you think about preparing for a cybersecurity incident, you want to put in place all the things that will help you respond. When I was speaking about visibility previously, you can achieve that using what we call sensors. So that's endpoint agents, that would be boxes that are installed on your network to record network traffic, pieces of software that are able to collect and store logs securely. And so once you are prepared for an incident, you can do things to assess the value of your information. You can identify where it's located on your network, and you can ensure that the mechanisms are in place to be able to identify if that information has been accessed. So, for example, you would not want to be in a position post incident where you had an attacker access your network and somebody asked the question, what did they see? Did they remove the data from your network? And how long did they have access to your network for? If you're unable to answer that, the default answer has to be it could have been anything, and they could have been accessing it for weeks or months. We don't actually know. Whereas if you've prepared and you've assessed where the information is on your network and what the sensitive parts are, you can ensure that you have adequate sensors, visibility, and telemetry from that part of your network, and you can answer that question very easily. Now, if you do not have things in place ahead of an incident, then it becomes far more difficult, and that's where you're going to start to have these cases where an incident response firm is going to have to spend many hours around the clock with you to scour your network, look for historical artifacts. We call this digital forensics. So you can take a look at a disk image and attempt to understand what an attacker or users have been doing for the previous days, weeks, and months. This, of course, is limited by how much data you can have access to and how long you've waited to do this assessment. The rule of thumb is you want to move quickly because data ages off and disappears. But overall, the stress levels are going to go up, and you're going to have to basically get as much data as possible. And at that point, you're looking at person hours invested to do the assessment.
Brennan, let me underscore what Andrew has just said with an analogy that's physical. You come home, the front door is kicked in, some things are missing. You've obviously had a burglary. But did the crooks take your safe deposit box key? Did they replace your Rembrandt with a fake? Did they steal? What exactly did they steal? Because you don't have an inventory. Did they make a key to the front door so that they can come back again? And just for mischief, did they leave a device in there that is going to, a stink bomb or something that is going to ruin your carpets? You don't know. It's much more difficult in Andrew's line of work than it is with cops coming into a breach like that. You replace the locks and keys and take an inventory, but it's a lot of work.
That's an excellent point, and really, at the end of the day, a lot of this can be very confusing and sound complex. What we like to do is simplify things, and really what we're trying to do in IT or cybersecurity is develop cyber situational awareness. And that means to know your systems. So that's the inventory that was just mentioned. To know the threats to your systems. So understanding ransomware or nation state actors. And then what to do in response to those threats. And that's what we're talking about at the moment.
Let's double down on that, because a traditional terrorist technique is to set off one small device, as in the Boston bombing, but then come in with a second larger device that does more damage. That didn't happen in the Boston bombing. Cyber criminals may start doing the same sort of thing. So your small event may simply be warning that you're going to have a larger event. Secondly, your cyber breach may have happened a year ago. A lot of cyber criminals put a payload into your computer system and don't activate it for a year, or it is triggered by a certain event that maybe you engage in. Your insurance may not cover that payload that was put in a year ago. So that's why you need Andrew to look through your systems to see if anything's there, and that's even more difficult.
All excellent points, gents. I think just before wrapping things up here, a couple more questions. Let's turn things over to Andrew, but when it comes to notifications, you had mentioned police, Alan had mentioned law enforcement. Who should we keep in mind if we are impacted by this? Who do we need to notify?
The first thing that you should be doing is investigating whether or not you have cyber insurance for your business. And as part of cyber insurance, what the process would be post-breach. This is important because your insurance company may in fact define these steps for you or what incident response firm you need to use. but quite often they will provide to you what's called a breach coach. And a breach coach is often a lawyer or a professional of some form that helps walk you through what to do immediately following an incident, what information you need to be gathering, what questions you need to be prepared to answer, and and then whether or not you're obligated to do notification or publication of the cybersecurity incident. And so typically in Canada, you might have to report a breach of security safeguards to the Privacy Commissioner. So there can be federal notifications that are required. Depending on the province that you're in or the state that you're in, if you're in the United States, you may have local or more regional breach notification rules that apply to you. Then, of course, you will have to notify your insurance company if you haven't already. And then internally, and this is critical, you need to be able to notify your staff, executive, board members, all parties that have a stake. And you may not initially think about it. For instance, human resources or, of course, public relations. The chief financial officer may have to be aware of the incident to be able to make decisions about disbursements. And so there's quite a lengthy list of individuals that may need to be notified and at varying points in the breach.
You said the magic word, public relations. I'll turn that over to you, Alan. What do you recommend?
Well, Andrew just articulated about 3 or 4 days worth of work, and there's a concept called the myth of expanded time. Many of the crisis plans that I read say, well, Bob is going to notify the government, and Susan's going to notify stakeholders, and Harry's going to write a letter to all customers. Well, Harry can't find the 5,000 customers. In one event I was involved in, they had 5,000 customers, and when you are writing to J. Smith, is that Doctor, Mr., Professor? Is it Ms., Mrs., Mr.? And you don't know. And the hot team should be keeping those lists current. Secondly, you said, who do you keep in mind and who do you notify? In one particular cyber breach, in one jurisdiction, it was required to notify everyone that personal information may have been compromised. The postage alone was $20 million. Now, if you do the notification incorrectly or improperly and have to redo it, that's another $20 million just for stuffing the envelopes. Who do you keep in mind? I like the Michael Corleone strategy. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. You have competitors, you have enemies, you have aggrieved customers who will use this as an opportunity to get you. So you got to keep everybody in mind and do all that stuff that Andrew talked about day one.
And with that said, thank you so much for your time, gents. What incredible insights. Great, and we are back. I tell you, that was one of those conversations where time definitely flies by, and to distill it down to 20 minutes is I'm sure a pretty tough feat for the editors. So big thanks for those folks for doing that. So without further ado, we do have Alan and Andrew joining us here, but we want to make sure that we're looping you into the conversation. So using the chat, we welcome you to ask any questions that come to mind just based off of what you just saw. And then also too, you also have the opportunity to turn on your video. And we found out that as far as studies go, there's actually about 25% more engagement when people use video. So if you can turn on your microphone and video, we would love to bring you into the conversation here. But if there are any sort of questions, just feel free to drop them in the chat, even if you don't want to go on video here. But if there are no questions right now, we do have the opportunity to leverage polling function. So we'll see if we can get the team to pull that up here in a couple minutes here. Here we go. So the first question is, what is the cyber threat that worries you the most? Now, if you're on mobile, this might have shown up on your mobile device as a pop-up. If you're on desktop, it should be a green poll with a window. So we'll give you about 10 seconds here to answer the poll. And you have a few different options. There's phishing with a financial loss, ransomware, supply chain risk, and insider threat. Which of those would keep you up at night? It looks like the polls have closed, and 61% of you, it looks like ransomware is definitely top of mind. So I think what I'm going to do is, just with that said, I'll throw it over to Andrew first. Does that surprise you, Andrew?
There you go. Got the unmute to work. It encourages me. I think that the top two identified risks would line up with the threats most likely to affect businesses or organizations today. I think that if you look at some of the newly released reporting, actually, in fact, you see that phishing, at least in terms of publicly reported loss of value or loss of money, financially speaking, is actually higher than ransomware. But I would wager a guess that that is because ransomware tends to be underreported. It's not something that necessarily makes its way up to government officials so that they can tabulate it accordingly. Whereas loss of money through phishing or financial redirection attacks will be recorded by the banks as the money is lost there. Yeah, that's encouraging that certainly the audience is aware of the threats most likely to affect them, although the other threats are of course quite serious and need to be taken accordingly.
And Alan, as a former broadcaster, does this news surprise you, and what the voting results were?
Well, I was a broadcaster long before there were cybersecurity threats, so I'm not sure that perspective is going to help. But what I will say is protect yourself regardless, because phishing, ransomware, and insider threat may all be the same thing. One element that's not reported much by the audience is supply chain, and that was the weak link. An air conditioning company that was servicing a large multinational retailer, and they got in through that weak link. So supply chain is a much more vulnerable spot than the poll indicates. I would like to add a category. I was involved, one of the cyber breaches that I was involved in was indeed an insider threat, an inside job. Another was just inside mistake. Someone mistakenly setting and resetting the computer systems, and that caused a big crash. Everybody thought it was a cyber breach. It was just a mistake. But one more category, the outside mischief maker, not ransomware, not terrorist, not state actor, just a mischief maker. And that doesn't matter what the motivation is. If you get mugged on the street, it doesn't matter whether the person was after your watch, your wallet, or just crazed.
And we have our first question here too. So you mentioned cyber risk insurance in your presentation. The number of attacks and breaches continues to rise year on year, and 2020 was the worst on record so far. The inevitable result will be that cyber risk insurance premiums will increase. So the question is, what can firms do in order to counter this? And are there things firms can do to reduce their cyber risk premiums? Andrew, what are your thoughts there, since you mentioned that?
I think it's a fascinating question, and it's a fascinating environment. And absolutely, it is the case that one of the baseline controls that is recommended across the world is to make sure that you have cyber insurance to cover you in the event of ransomware or similar. And it is true that it doesn't take a lot of thinking to understand that as insurance companies are making more and more payouts, that the premiums associated with cyber and cyber risk insurance are likely to go up. I have no detailed insider information in terms of what the actuarial science is regarding to cyber insurance and payouts. However, in myself, I would tend to look at it like auto insurance or home insurance. So the question is, what can you do to help make yourself more insurable and also reduce your premiums? So there are some cyber insurance companies that are providing some reduction in premiums for those organizations that have certain technical or other measures in place to help reduce their risk or likelihood of having a compromise. However, one thing's for certain is that just like a safe driving record or installing a smoke alarm in your home, insurance companies are likely to recognize that if it's not tomorrow, it will be over time. And in terms of what you can do as a business today, I would recommend taking a look at some of the leading frameworks in Canada. There's the Canadian Center for Cybersecurity's baseline controls document. In the US, there's the NIST cybersecurity framework. And of course, there's many other reputable and well-structured cybersecurity frameworks that are available globally. And what those frameworks do is that they establish the basics that a business should have in place to ensure that they're A, protected from the threats most likely to affect them, and B, in a position to respond and defend against attacks should they occur to them. And what that'll do is demonstrate to insurance company that you really are taking meaningful, effective measures to protect yourself and your business.
Alan, your thoughts?
Well, I'm with Andrew, the so-called due diligence defense, meaning have you done all that a reasonable organization or person would do to protect yourself, is among the best insurance policies so that you can get a better premium. But he mentioned the actuarial science, and insurance is one of those very complex issues like the law, where insurance companies will lay off some of their book on reinsurance companies and retrocession companies, which are the third tier of companies. And in some of the events I've been involved in, it is a heck of a time trying to find out who actually is the insurer, because with some of my personal insurance, it's been bought by a bank and the company is long gone. So read all the fine print and make sure that you have a company that is going to pay, because there are things called pre-existing conditions in healthcare. They exist in cybersecurity as well. There could be a payload or something in there, or your insurance could be invalidated because you have former employees who still have passwords or something. So reading the fine print is the best advice.
So I'm listening to these great great insights that both of you are providing here, but I'm just thinking to myself how unbelievably complicated this could be, because I'm not a lawyer. I've read legislation in past, just for past projects, but I think Andrew had mentioned that there's some sort of supports that are out there. So I'm guessing that there's a few that are listening out here and thinking, should I be reaching out to one of those supports right now? And who would that be? And what does that look like?
Absolutely. One of the first steps you can take is to call your business insurance provider and ask them, are you covered for cyber risk or in the event of a cyber security incident? The answer you get back might be a yes or no, and you can proceed accordingly. Provided that you do have insurance, what you can do is ask the insurance company, what does the process look like should I have an incident? And the reason why that's helpful is that they may have a panel of incident response firms, the technology providers like Field Effect, that can provide incident response services to you. So that is a very helpful measure to have in place. The second thing is that they may have what's called a breach coach that they can make available to you. And as mentioned earlier, a breach coach often is a lawyer, but there are also firms that specialize in providing a breach coach. And what they do is they're your first line to call, and they help guide you through the steps that you need to be undertaking to make sure that your business risk is minimized, that your technical risk is minimized, and that you're following all the right steps in terms of government reporting and due diligence for your customers and for your business.
And it looks like we've also got a question here as well from the audience, and I think we'll turn this one over to Alan since he mentioned it. But the cost of cybersecurity, even without a breach, seems expensive. How much should small and medium-sized businesses expect to dedicate to cybersecurity?
Well, there's also something called self-insurance, which is a fancy way of saying you don't have any insurance and you're simply going to pay the costs of remediation and fixing the place up should something happen. And this is very common in big shipping enterprises and the resource sector. And a small business might even want to consider that, put away some money. When you buy when you buy washer, dryer, fridge, stove for your home, you decide whether to get a warranty. You may also just put away money, and if you need it, call Andrew or call me. But I think that you have to get three prices, and one of the answers that you'll get, just to play on what Andrew said, is you say, "Am I insured for this?" You may not get a yes or no. You may got yes, very likely, or no, in case, or yes, if. And you've got to probe those discussions and get to the bottom of what insurance you're having. I had a consultant look through insurance for me, and I got a 5-word briefing. The company's expensive, but they pay. And I bought that type of insurance. I did have a claim. It went very quickly. The other insurance company I had took a month to tell me I wasn't covered. So you want service at the end of the day.
Well, thank you both for your answers here to those questions, and make sure to enter in the chat as well. And we also have the option available for
Brennan?
folks joining us here. Oh, yeah.
I might just add to that last question if you like, and I can maybe perhaps take a different tack.
Yeah, you bet.
Absolutely. So one of the things, and if the question was related to the measures and investment you can make ahead of an incident in terms of shoring up your cybersecurity, having cyber insurance is one element of that. The one thing that I think is important to underscore is that in 2021, cybersecurity is an investment that all businesses need to make. It is true that it can be somewhat daunting because there can be an overwhelming sense that if the big banks are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars or even millions of dollars per month for their cybersecurity, what am I to do? Because I can't afford that budget. The good news is that many of the measures that you can put in place are low cost. Certainly, becoming aware and investing in the time to focus on cybersecurity really has no direct cost to you, at least insofar as your bank account is concerned. However, there are many great cybersecurity offerings available to you that can provide effective cybersecurity visibility and protection while not breaking the bank. One other data point I'll mention is that the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity's baseline controls document actually does provide some guidance with regards to how much of your IT budget should be directed towards cybersecurity measures.
Thank you.
That's great, and we have some great conversations happening here in the chat, which is excellent to see. And sorry for for skipping into that question there, Andrew. As far as the conversations that have been taking place in the background here on chat, there's been a lot about tool sets in education. So maybe I'll throw it back to you here, Andrew, and then we'll go back to you, Alan. When we talk about tool sets in education, what do you want viewers to take away from today in terms of what's available to them or what they might want to explore?
In terms of the kinds of purchasing options they might have? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I would go back to that fundamental concept that we introduced earlier, which is the one of cyber situational awareness. So when trying to center yourself in terms of all the different options and all the different considerations that you need to be thinking about when considering cybersecurity, think about cyber situational awareness. So you need to know your systems. So in other words, you need to be able to identify what computers on your network. Is your HVAC thermostat connected to your network? Do you have accounts that are in the cloud? So the cloud is part of it. You need to know the threats to your systems. So today we established that ransomware and financial redirection attacks are the two most likely threats to most businesses. And then you need to know what to do in response to those threats. And so what that rolls up to is you want to be looking for a solution that gives you visibility or insight into what's going on your network. you need to have a solution that supports the network you use. So today, we're not just a Windows on-premise network. We are Windows, Mac OS, Linux. We're using cloud systems. We're using mobile devices. And so you need a solution that supports you in all those domains. And then you need a solution that is able to articulate to you, and this goes to the education piece, that is able to articulate to you why the events on your network or why a given risk or a threat is significant to you, and provides details to you that are understandable and relatable so that you can take action and take action appropriately. So those would be the guidelines I would use.
Great.
Funny, Brendan, I noticed something in the chat room about disaster plans, and let me say a couple of things. One, to build on what Andrew said, you can also go to the General Accounting Office in the US and see what people on average spend on cybersecurity. But if it's 3, 5, 8, 12% of pre-tax or post-tax or gross or what have you, you still have to make your own decision. Is that a good investment for me, and how vulnerable am I? But I'll say something about disaster plans. There are 6 words that are either completely absent or rarely appear in any disaster plans. Those words are public transit. So in terms of evacuation, there's no public transit plan. Number 2, pandemic. That's a word. Only in one of the 100 urban emergency plans I've read. And the other 2 words are cybersecurity. They are not in disaster plans at the municipal level or normally at the corporate level. This is kind of playing a lot of catch up. And I think that individuals and organizations have to say, we're not prepared. We've got to get on board. What are we going to do about pets? What are we going to do in a happy event? Maybe the entire accounting department wins the lottery and gives instant notice. We're not coming back into work. We're going to retire early. That's a happy event for them. It's a crisis for you.
Those are all very excellent points. And I think what we're going to do is we're going to go to our second poll here. So if we can get that queued up, please, that would be great. While we're doing that, I'll just read out the question. Which of the following do you think is the biggest cybersecurity mistake? And here are your options. Failing to have cybersecurity insurance, failing to have an updated breach plan or breach plan at all, counting on your service provider to protect your information in the cloud, thinking you are too small to be hacked, and last but most certainly not least, putting the implementation of multi-factor authentication on the 2022 to-do list. So I'll give you a few seconds to respond to that poll. I see we have results here, and it looks like 62% of you, with the question, which of these do you think is the biggest cybersecurity mistake? 62% of you say that thinking you are too small to be hacked is the most popular choice here, followed by failing to have an updated breach plan or a breach plan at all. Andrew, any surprises there?
Aside from the fact that I'm myself surprised that folks were able to identify the one that I would have put my money on, which is thinking that you're too small to be hacked. I think it is an easy thing to assume that you are either too small or not interesting enough. I don't know if there's somebody that's got their microphone on in the background. There we go. I think one of the things that really does catch people off guard is that cyber threat actors, cyber criminals target relatively indiscriminately. And so the same cyber threats that affect large organizations like a bank or a multinational corporation also affect businesses of any size. And in fact, in some cases, even the smallest businesses, so if you think about like a dentist office that might have only 5 people in it, can be even more victimized than the largest business. And the reason for that is if you don't prepare and you don't have the measures in place to protect your network ahead of time, when a cyber threat actor, when a ransomware actor gets on your network and they understand that they've landed on a network that has value or that is owned or run by somebody that may have a lot of money, such as a dentist, then they're going to proceed accordingly, and they will adjust the ransomware to make sure that they're able to extract as much financial gain as possible. And we see the Acer example that you referenced at the top of the talk, which is that $50 million ransom demand is significant. And I would wager that the ransomware actor has either found that they are on some very critical systems, or they've also concluded that Acer has a capacity to pay. And so the same methodology will be employed by ransomware actors on small networks, just the same as they are on large. And unfortunately, cyber threat actors are indiscriminate, as I said, in terms of how they target and how they compromise. They just look for vulnerabilities they can use.
Alan.
Well, I think they were astute reactions to the poll, and I compliment the audience for that. I will say, you know, depending on how you interpret these things, having a plan could cover all other elements, because your plan could be to look into insurance and so on and so forth. So let me just say a word about plans. I think it was Dwight Eisenhower who said having a plan is essential, or planning is essential, but having a plan is useless, or something like that. And von Clausewitz, the German military planner, said no plan survives the first shot in battle. Things change. And Henry Mintzberg, the management guru from McGill, who invented left brain, right brain, which is not how the brain works, but it sold a few books for him. He said, don't forget, planning isn't actually doing anything. It's only planning to do things. But let me say a good word about plans. I studied and taught the martial arts for 18 years. And one of the exercises we did was say, pick an activity. Well, let's say it's poke somebody in the eye. That's the activity if you're mugged. And then we would have a sparring match. And if you ended up upside down, backwards, sideways, underneath someone or whatever, you still went about trying to poke someone in the eye. You had that one simple reaction to the event. And that kind of an activity is a metaphor for the fact that the studies show that any organization which does have a plan, even if it's not a very good plan, even if it's an outdated plan, even if it forgets certain things such as cybersecurity or pandemic planning, they are better off, and they will recover more quickly from any sort of a crisis. So have a plan. And that causes you to say, well, what should be in the plan? Should it be insurance? Should it be two-factor authentication? What exactly should it be? So a happy word about planning.
Another question here for you, Andrew. If you could fix one thing about the cybersecurity industry, from your perspective, what would that be?
That's a great question. I think that the cybersecurity industry fails at providing clearly defined, well understood solutions that solve the problem for businesses in an economical manner. I think that all too often we're caught up by the latest and greatest bleeding edge technology and treating that as a silver bullet, when that actually is not the answer to cybersecurity. You need to have a holistic view of things, and you need to be able to implement some very basic and well understood measures. They're not easy to implement all the time. That's not what I'm saying. And they're not easy to develop either, but there are some basic, straightforward, well understood and scientifically measured ways to measurably reduce the risk to your business and on your network. And I think that we sometimes lose sight of those things.
Alan.
Well, I'm all for that. I'll double down on that. As a matter of fact, we have the Tallinn Manual, we have NATO, we have African states, we have treaties on the order paper at the UN from, of all people, the Chinese and the Russians about cybersecurity. We have NIST, we have the International Names Group, whatever they're called. I mean, everybody's got a piece of this. Microsoft has a white paper, and when I began this sentence, there were 25 different guide books and documents, and by the time I finish the sentence, there will be 35. What we need is exactly what Andrew said, is the simple, clear, plain advice in plain language. I mean, we don't need to call it two-factor authentication. We can just say when you go on to use a device, you're going to get a text, you verify it's you, and away you go. Simple, clear language so people aren't intimidated and they do engage in it.
Time certainly does fly by. We only have about 5 minutes left. So on that note, I want to throw it over to Andrew here to give us your take on any last pieces of advice that you'd like to give the audience for what they can take away and action today.
I think one thing to keep in mind is that cybersecurity is not a hopeless endeavor. It's going to be part of our lives always, so it's pervasive and persistent. But it isn't a hopeless task. It doesn't have to be anything that costs an arm and a leg or puts you under. It is something that you can invest in first through knowledge, understanding what the lay of the land is in terms of the basic measures. We've talked about the NIST cybersecurity framework, the baseline controls document, as well as investing a little bit in preparing for an incident. So making sure that your network's in good shape, that you have the right dials set to the right places, and that you have the basic controls, as well as having some security monitoring, getting that active visibility and support to you, the business owner, the business operator, so that you can do your job. I think it's no longer reasonable to expect that businesses around the world are going to be able to solve the challenge on their own. It really does, much like a lawyer helps a business or you have external marketing and sales firms help a business. It's the same with cybersecurity, and having somebody that you trust and is supportive is a critical step to moving forward.
And Alan, your thoughts here just before we wrap up.
Well, a lot of information goes by very quickly. I want to emphasize and clarify something I recently said. I'm not actually advocating poking anyone in the eye. That was just a metaphor. It was a story. Please don't do that and say I authorized it. But I would hearken back to what the military said to me many times when I was traveling with them on bases all across Canada. Put your pencils down, take your fingers off the keyboard, read your own crisis plan if you have one, and you will smack yourself in the forehead and say, who on earth wrote this stuff? This is way out of date. It's got fax machine numbers in it, and it's got landlines, no cell phones. And just give some intelligent thought and quiet time to cybersecurity. Try to think like the perpetrator. Walk around your own facility and say, could I passively receive the data here? Can I see the screens on the computers? It's probably yes. Can I get in the back? I've gotten into the UN in New York, into DND HQ, onto airlines with no proper identification. And I'm not all that charming. I just got on by creating a diversion. So cyber criminals can do much the same thing.
Well, gents, I'm glad to see that despite the serious topic, we're able to bring humor here today. So I just want to say thank you for your time, and a special thank you to Field Effect for making today possible. And a special thanks to each of you who are joining us here today from all across Canada from the looks of things. So just be on the lookout for an email here from IT World Canada that will feature a survey. We highly encourage you to fill that out. That's how we can make events like this better over time. And again, we would just like to thank you again so very much for setting aside this hour here today to join us, and of course your questions. Thank you so much for submitting those as well.
Pleasure.
And with that,
It's been a pleasure.
thank you so much, gents.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.